1948, a historic assembly of women gathered in Seneca Falls, New York, the home of Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Stanton organized the Seneca Falls Convention with Lucretia Mott, who, like her, had been excluded from the World Anti-Slavery Convention in London 8 years earlier. Modeling her declaration closely on the Declaration of Independence, Stanton extended it to list the grievances of women. The Declaration also called for the right for women to vote, a radical demand that helped launch the women's suffrage movement, leading ultimately to the recognition of the voting rights for women in the 19th Amendment in 1920. Estrella Castillo will perform the Declaration of Sentiments.
Whereas the great precept of nature is conceded to be, quote, that man shall pursue his own true and substantial happiness. Blackstone, in his commentaries, remarks that this law of nature be coeval with mankind and dictated by all that is God itself, is of course superior in obligation to any other. It is binding over all the globe, in all countries, and at all times. No human laws are of any validity if contrary to this, and such of them as are valid derive all their force and all their validity and all their authority immediately and immediately from this original. Therefore, resolved that such laws as conflict in any way with the true and substantial happiness of women are contrary to the great precept of nature, and of no validity, for this is superior in obligation to any other. Resolved, that all laws which prevent woman from occupying such a station in society as her conscience shall dictate, or which place her in a position inferior to that of man, are contrary to the great precept of nature, and therefore of no force or authority. Resolved, that woman is man's equal, was intended to be so by all that is the Creator, and the highest good of the race demands that she should be recognized as such. Resolved, that the women of this country ought to be enlightened in regard to the laws under which they live, that they may no longer publish their degradation by declaring themselves satisfied with their present position, nor their ignorance, by assessing that they have all the rights they want. Resolved, that inasmuch as man, while claiming for himself intellectual superiority, does accord to women moral superiority, it is preeminently his duty to encourage her to speak and teach, as she has the opportunity, in all religious assemblies and beyond. Resolved, that the same amount of virtue, delicacy, and refinement of behavior that is required of women in the social state should also be required of man, and the same transgressions should be visited with equal severity on both man and woman. Resolved, that the objection of indelicacy and impropriety, which is so often brought against women when she addresses a public audience, comes with a very ill grace from those who encourage, by their attendance, her appearance on the stage, in the concert, or in the feats of the circus. Resolved, that woman has too long rested satisfied in the circumscribed limits which corrupt customs and a perverted application of the scriptures have marked out for her, and that it is time she should move in the enlarged sphere which all that is her and all's Creator has assigned her. Resolved, that it is the duty of the women of this country to secure themselves their sacred right to the elective franchise. Resolved, that the equality of human rights results necessarily from the fact of the identity of the race in capabilities and responsibilities. Resolved, therefore, that being invested by all that is Creator with the same capabilities and the same consciousness of responsibility for their exercise, it is demonstratively the right and duty of woman, equally with man, to promote every righteous cause by every righteous means, and especially in regard to the great subjects of morals and religion, it is self-evidently her right to participate with her brother in teaching them, both in private and in public, by writing and by speaking, by any instrumentalities proper to be used, and in any assemblies proper to be held, and this being a self-evident truth, growing out of the divinely implanted principles of human nature, any custom or authority adverse to it, whether modern or wearing the hoary sanction of antiquity, is to be regarded a self-evident falsehood and at war with the interests of all mankind.
A member of ACT UP, an organization created to bring the issues of AIDS to mainstream America, Vito Russo was a powerful voice during the time of a major turmoil for the gay community. In 1988, AIDS was viewed by the Reagan administration as something concerning only homosexuals and drug addicts. Many believed that those with AIDS deserved what they got. The ACT UP coalition forced the government to do something about the crisis and brought attention to the fact that AIDS was an epidemic that impacted all of the communities and all of our spaces. Arnie will share an excerpt from Russo's 1988 speech on AIDS.
You know, for the last 3 years since I was diagnosed, my family thinks two things about my situation. One, they think I'm going to die. And two, they think that my government is doing absolutely everything in their power to stop that, and they're wrong on both counts. So if I'm dying from anything, I'm dying from homophobia. If I'm dying from anything, I'm dying from racism. If I'm dying from anything, it's indifference and red tape, because these are the things that are preventing an end to this crisis. If I'm dying from anything, I'm dying from Jesse Helms. If I'm dying from anything, I'm dying from the President of the United States. And especially if I'm dying from anything, I'm dying from the sensationalism of newspapers and magazines and television shows, which are interested in me as a human interest story only as long as I'm willing to be a helpless victim, but not if I'm fighting for my life. If I'm dying from anything, I'm dying from the fact that not enough rich, white, heterosexual men have gotten AIDS for anybody to give a shit. You know, living with AIDS in this country is like living in the Twilight Zone. Living with AIDS is like living through a war which is happening only for those people who happen to be in the trenches. Every time a shell explodes, you look around and you discover that you've lost more of your friends, but nobody else notices. It isn't happening to them. They're walking streets as though we weren't living through some sort of nightmare. And only you can hear the screams of the people who are dying and their cries for help. Nobody else seems to be noticing. And it's worse than the war, because during a war, people are united in a shared experience. This war has not united us, it's divided us. It's separated those of us with AIDS and those of us who fight for people with AIDS from the rest of the population.
A Lithuanian immigrant, Emma Goldman, was an anarchist and feminist orator, agitator, and organizer. She was jailed many times for her speeches. An outspoken critic of war, Goldman, after the outbreak for World War I in Europe, worked to launch the No Conscription League. When she and her fellow anarchist Alexander Berkman spoke out against the draft in June 1917, they were imprisoned. After the war, they were deported to their country of origin, Russia, which had become Soviet Russia. This is an excerpt from the famous speech being performed by Paola Martinez.
Friends, tomorrow morning I'm sure you will read the report that a meeting took place on the East Side attended by foreigners, by workmen, and ill-kept, poorly washed people of the East Side. Foreigners who are being jeered at the present time in this country, foreigners who are being ridiculed because they have an idea. Well, friends, If the Americans are to wait until Americans wake up in the country, they will have to resurrect the Indians who were killed in America and upon whose bodies this so-called democracy was established. Because every other American, if you scratch him, you will find him to be an Englishman, a Dutchman, a Frenchman, a Spaniard, a Jew, and a German, and 101 other nationalities who sent their young men and their women to this country in the foolish belief that liberty was awaiting them at the American harbor. Liberty holding a torch. That torch has been burning dimly in the United States for a very long time. It is because the goddess of liberty is ashamed of the American people and what they have done in the name of liberty to liberty in the United States. And yet, friends, I'm not sorry for the things that are happening in America today. I have come to the conclusion that every nation is like an individual. It must have its own experience, and it does not accept the experience of other nations any more than you accept the experience of another individual. For, if it were possible for a nation to learn by the bitter and tragic experience of other nations, America today could not be in war, and America today could not have inaugurated a reign of terror which is sweeping across the country from one end to another. America had Europe before its face as an example, with all the murders and bloodshed and corpses and millions of lives lost. America had the trenches and the battlefields of the last nearly 3 years of Europe before her. America realized that this war is one of the bloodiest and most criminal wars that have ever been fought by civilized people. America had the lessons of the working people and the sons of the women that are being sacrificed in the name of culture, and they want democracy upon the battlefields of Europe. And if America had to be a grown man instead of a child, it would have learned the lesson that no matter how great the cost, it is never great enough to sacrifice millions of people in the trenches and on the battlefields in the name of democracy or liberty.
Okay, so now we'd like to open up to the audience. Any questions that you might have for our performers? If you have a hand up, yes?
Yeah, I was just wondering how you select these pieces, or do the students select them? Whether pre-selected?
Okay.
Hello. So over the summer, a group of students got together and selected pieces based around the theme social movements. And we tried to pick pieces that we connect to. So like my piece is from the American Indian movement. My family's from Lame Deer, Montana. My grandfather was very involved with the movement in Montana and at Pine Ridge as well. So that piece really spoke to me, and I could only really speak for myself, but a lot of the pieces were selected by the students. Are there any other questions?
Or does anybody else want to speak to their
Does
speech?
anyone want to speak to that?
Okay, other questions? It's a good one. Come on. Yes.
I guess it's for everybody. If you weren't exposed to some of these speeches before, how did they change you, or did they?
I think Alan should speak.
Well, from before this speech, I've heard this speech before, and when I first saw this speech, it was unbelievable. If you guys ever get a chance to see Mario Savio's speech of 1964, it is unbelievable. I mean, if you thought I was yelling, you should listen to this guy. It's very impressive how there's people that can actually make a difference just by speaking their voice, just by simply giving a speech or by being heard. That really connected with me. Thank you.
Anyone else?
So I don't know if I need a microphone. But I didn't have an individual speech, so I had an opportunity to really look at all the speeches. And I think there's a narrative here that relates directly to where we are in our lives right now, about race, gender, class, about access to health care, whether it be AIDS or senior citizens or people with disabilities. The narrative is that we've been fighting this ever since the Constitution, since 1776. over the last 50 years, just recently, the women's been given the right to vote. Just recently, John Lewis was just talking about voting rights and the rights to be able to vote. And here we are again, fighting for the right to be able to vote and watching voting rights being taken away from us. And for the low-income class, for women, for people with disabilities, from seniors. We'll continue to just fight over and over again. So the revolution continues, resistance continues, and we as students at colleges and universities, like Savo, are still working on these same issues. So I think it's important as we sit in these students and listen to these speeches that this is not something in the past. These are people speaking in voices that directly affect us today.
Anyone else on the panel want to speak to that? Paula?
I think that, at least for me, and I don't know if I can speak for everyone, there's definitely a sense of unity and a sense of togetherness with our history. For a very long time, I think we've been so disconnected from it, and we're fighting for the same things that they were fighting for. And it's definitely, although it's tragic, I think it's amazing that we can actually pinpoint this and work together again, just like they did, and keep working for the same issues and actually make a change and make a difference.
Anyone else? Okay, yes. Vito Russo? Vito Russo was actually really interesting. He was a film critic. You may have heard of him before. He did an anthology of the appearance of people that were homosexual in film from like the beginning of film. And that was around 1980. And his partner was actually, if I remember correctly, diagnosed with AIDS first and had a lot of other friends that passed away as a result. And so the ACT UP coalition was started in the early 80s as an attempt to try to make it clear that AIDS was not only something that was affecting homosexuals or people that were drug users, it was something that would eventually and did affect the entire population, especially people of color, right? So he was an activist, he was a journalist, he was a writer, he was a film critic, an academic, many argued. He had a TV show that was very funny that aired in San Francisco. Some people might have seen clips from that. But, definitely someone who was affected himself by the AIDS epidemic, but spoke up at an important time. And it's important to understand that the government of this country did not give a shit about people with AIDS. They, in fact, believed that they deserved it and did not have any interest in looking into any cures. So if it wasn't for folks coming and making this a mainstream issue, we would be seeing a very different reality today. Yeah? People like Magic Johnson wouldn't be making it happen, years after the, contracting HIV. Yeah.
As a teacher, what are your views kind of on history that's taught to children in which they glorify people like Christopher Columbus and people who have done questionable things? What are your views on, especially the texts that are used in classrooms? How would you say that we could convert it into a classroom setting in which texts like People's History by Howard Zinn are used more often?
Well, it's a great question, especially because hopefully all of you have heard about the Chicago Teachers Union strike, yes? We had a huge victory yesterday. So I have the pleasure of being a political action vice president for our AFT Local 1931 here at San Diego City College. And those of you may know that the Chicago Teachers Union is AFT Local 1. It's the very first local. And so what they were fighting for the last couple of weeks has to do with partly your question. What we see in education is not faculty and teachers at all levels creating curriculum often. We're very lucky, I would say, here, especially at City College, that I get to choose what I teach, like how I teach political science, yes? But many K-12 educators are forced to use curriculum that the state decides upon. And much of that curriculum is not chosen by teachers themselves, but rather the business community that wants to sell textbooks or that's interested in a specific version of history for our children. So to be fair and to be clear, by the time many of you get here to community college, you've been indoctrinated in lies and indoctrinated in a history that only discusses the victors and a history that does not discuss people that look like you. So I would say that it's disgusting, right? I have huge problems with it. And I think it's also why when people come into colleges, they wake up to find that, things that they've been taught have often been pretty inaccurate and have to kind of relearn everything that they've heard in the past. So it's a form of re-education, and that's why we get so much, many people think we're all these crazy liberals here, yeah, that are teaching things. Well, the reality is that we're just teaching you many of the things you didn't hear before. So I'm hoping that answers your question, but one of the very things that people were striking about had to do with access to being able, teachers are actually trained to teach. I don't know if y'all know that. So one would think that they should be the ones creating curriculum. Yes?
So, it's my understanding that we're kind of blessed here at City College because this is a college where we are allowed to study and possess our sins, human history of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
There are other states that don't allow that, and could you elaborate on that more?
Well, I'm saying at the K-12 level, it's very rare you're going to see people's history of the United States in a classroom. But in the community college and academic, university levels, generally speaking, faculty are able to decide what they teach. But it depends upon the department you're in. I'm an adjunct faculty, so I don't have a tenured position. In some departments in different places throughout the country, that means that I would have to just teach what they tell me to teach. I'm fortunate here that they give me the ability to decide. But it is true that it just is dependent upon where you are. And quite honestly, I don't think that a people's history of the United States is all that radical. It's based on historical documents. It's not like Howard Zinn made it up, right? It is historically accurate. He did a ton of research during his lifetime to compile this book. And so it's not that it's radical, it's that it's a version that may be uncomfortable for people to read.
I guess my question was just that it's my understanding that they will not teach or allow people to possess the book in universities in Arizona. Are there any other states?
Yeah, I don't know for sure, and it could be the case in Arizona. I don't know for sure. I would assume that since they're getting rid of ethnic studies in Arizona, a book like this would probably be not so favored. Yeah, other questions? Yes. I think right under I can barely see you. Go ahead. It's Kelly. I know her voice. Go ahead, my love.
So, how about you all tell us what you want people to do with this? This was a phenomenal performance, and I thank you so much. And one of my classes has a whole project that Class Estrella is on social movements at the end of the semester. What do you want people to do with?
I think I could only give you a cursory answer. One of the things is to wash away aspects of cynicism and self-defeat in regards to how we approach our political institutions and how we manage our lives in that regard. I think if I asked people in the audience how many of you are registered to vote, so I could ask that right now. How many of you are registered to vote? Awesome. So kudos. That's one of the steps, because people who throughout this country have fought, been in prison, and have died for the right to vote. And I think it's important for us to understand our electoral system as something that still needs improvement, but even on a local level needs our investment or investigation and or participation. So when you think about it, we have a role to play. It's to highlight it in regards to history, like we're making history on a daily level. And then there's plenty of initiatives that we need to think about and talk about in regards to November that's coming up, especially in regards to our presidential elections. We need to start opening up a better conversation about the economy, about foreign policy, about human rights, and start to understand the faults of living in a post-Citizens United campaign system, legislative system, and to kind of also think past, like, is it our role as Americans to only see our political system function as an economy between Democrats and Republicans? I think we all need to challenge ourselves a little bit further and kind of play a huge role in implementing change. So there's a vast amount of structural issues, and I would definitely suggest that people who find their niche, whether it's something from like something at micro level, which is actually structural as well, discussing intimate partner violence or domestic violence, and also going all the way up to foreign policy and law, and how sanctions also affect women and others and those most marginalized within societies. So it's a big game, and we all got to play the part.
So quickly, first I want to go back to education right quick. I just want to congratulate all of you and our professors. I see Professor Mayhew back there, Professor Dorman here, and maybe some of the other folks I can see. San Diego City College has been voted the #1 community college in the country.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So you're sitting here, very proactive students. Largely thanks to you as students, but also, more importantly, to our professors here. But I guess the next thing is, what can we do? Andreas talked about voting. Well, what do I vote for? What is the difference? I just watched on the film from 1963, they were still marching to 200,000 people watching about jobs and civil rights and equal rights. Here we are again today, 30, 40, 50 years later, talking about the same thing. Was anyone not paying attention? Was anyone thinking that we didn't need jobs today as much as we needed them yesterday? And all of a sudden it's very important. So I think one of the most important things for you sitting here today, we're at the verge of losing $400 million and losing 700 classes. So we need for you to go out and vote yes for Proposition 31. We need you to vote no on 30. There's a lot of them out there. All right, so we need you to vote yes on Prop 30, no on Prop 32. We need you to vote yes on Proposition 37. How many people know what Proposition 37 is? But it's genetic modified foods. This is about labeling. This is about you being able to have a choice about what foods that you eat. So there's a lot of things that you need to try to work to be more educated, to find out what the issues are. We have a mayoral election, we have a presidential election, we have a state legislature, all of these issues. One of the first things I learned in Professor Dorman's class is that politics is about who gets what, where, when, and how. And I've learned this one thing: if you don't do politics, politics is going to do you. If you're sitting in Professor Mayhew's class, you realize that it's more than just about wages. And the teacher strike is more about wage. It's also about gender issues. Look at how many teachers there are women. How many women are making only 71% to every dollar that men are working? This is all about gender, race, class. All of these sort of issues. It's much deeper than just the surface things that our media is talking about. So I encourage you to go out, investigate, talk to your professors, talk to your individual professors about these things. Move forward, educate yourself, and vote as a resistor.
All right. So definitely take a look at the propositions, yes. Prop 30 in particular it's an initiative that will bring money back to education. If Prop 30 does not pass, does anybody want to take a guess how much is going to be taken out of K-14 education?
$6 billion.
$5.35 billion. Yep. So if Prop 30 doesn't pass, I may not be seeing many of you ever again, right? Because I won't be working here. And many of you will not be in the classroom, right? You won't be able to get classes. It'll be $250 million, I believe, at each of the CSUs and UCs as well. So if you want to transfer, that's going to be real rough, right? So you have a vested interest in taking a look at Prop 30. Prop 32 is an actually really disgusting campaign that's been created. It's an attempt to try to stop unions from being able to participate in politics. And the commercials you're going to see are freaking brilliant. They've said, oh, well, you don't want AT&T or corporations donating into politics, do you? Vote yes on 32. But really what it's doing is making it so that unions will not be able to participate in politics. So it's a very crafty little way of going after working people, right? So also take a look at 32 and consider voting no on it if that's something that you're comfortable with. A couple of other things. This Saturday, anybody heard about the Walmart that's going up in Sherman Heights? It's kind of a tragedy, right? They have taken over the old farmers market, that pink building that's been there for decades. They promised not to demolish it, and they started demolishing walls. And so this Saturday, there's going to be a rally starting at Golden Hill Park, right up the street at the end of 25th at 9 a.m. I know you're all like, I sleep in on Saturdays, I don't participate. Think about doing so. It's going to be a march, from what I understand, from Golden Hill Park down to the Sherman Heights site. It should be fairly quick, a couple of hours. And absolutely worth it if you're interested in what's going on in these communities, this idea of gentrification, these ideas of the big box stores coming in and taking out small businesses. This is directly affecting a community nearby. And more importantly, and I'm sorry I'm talking a lot, but we're almost done here, it's Rush Week. Yeah? So there are a number of clubs out in Gorton Quad today till 2 and tomorrow from 10 to 2. If you are interested in getting involved on campus, whether it be a club like BEAT or Visionary Feminist or Veterans for Peace, or there's a film club that's on campus that's fantastic, all kinds of stuff, all out at City. We have all sorts of different clubs that you can get to know, talk to folks, see what it's all about. So are there any other questions or thoughts? Yeah?
Yes, I attend all the board of trustee meetings, and yes, City College is #1 in the United States per chancellor. Okay, when you spoke in the union,
It's number one based on Rate My Professor. So let's just make sure that's clear. Yeah, so what that means is based upon what students have said on Rate My Professor, City College is the #1 campus.
exactly.
Yes.
Right. Okay, when you spoke of teachers unions,
Uh-huh.
the teachers unions is the largest union in the United States. Matter of fact, the teachers union, when we was talking about women having the right to vote, now it's 5 females to every 1 man. So the women got out there and made that happen.
Okay. Thank you for that. Okay? Yes, is there another hand? Yes, go ahead.
Is there some other reason behind the red black
Who wants that?
Well, I think we've done them in the past, and we've always done red and black. The last one that we did was very based on labor, and that was perfect. I also would like to say that the red is probably in solidarity with Chicago and the teachers there, but red and black is kind of anarchist colors. I don't know.
Colors of the left, I guess.
So yeah, red has been worn by the labor movements for a very long period of time. If we were to take the symbolic meaning behind black and red, you'd go as far back as political philosophies of anarcho-syndicalism, which combine decentralized organizing and understanding of how we engage as community members, and in a meta understanding of capitalism and how it functions, and the hope that we can decentralize capitalism in a way that supports socialist principles in regards to changing how capital is maintained by a select few and sharing it in a way that supports a collective, a society, as opposed to what we have now, where to use the Occupy rhetoric, like 1% of our society has accumulated a vast amount of wealth. And so you see this disparity, and it's a big issue. So that would be the symbolic reason behind black and red. Black representing the political philosophy of anarchism, and red political philosophy of, I could say, communism or Marxism.
And it's important to know, because we're throwing out terms here that some of you may be very uncomfortable with. Yes? That a lot of people that were laborers in this country, especially the turn of the last century in the early 1900s, identified as socialists, identified as anarchists. But again, this history is not part of what we hear. So what you've heard very often is that these are terms of people that destroy things and that are savage Yes? So we're trying to give you in giving you the history of people's history of the United States, we're also showing you the viewpoints of many of these thinkers. People like Helen Keller, yeah? Socialist. Shocking. Right? I mean, these are people that you've heard of. You don't hear about their politics. Okay. I hope you all had a great day. What'd y'all think? Yes? We have a couple of people we need to thank. We need to thank Rob Norberg, who came in early today to help us from the theater. We need to thank Patrick, who was our wonderful PowerPoint enthusiast. And we had some other helpers today. We had Leslie, who was here, somewhere back there. We had Jose, and we had Carrie. So thank you all so much for coming out. Get involved, get active.